Hello everyone and welcome to another SQL tutorial with Learn at No Start. Today we are going to discuss about stored procedures, how we can create a stored procedure, execute it, what are the advantages associated with stored procedure. So let's get started. A stored procedure is nothing but a pre-compiled piece of code. So a standalone piece of SQL statement can be put in a stored procedure, and then you can reutilize the stored procedure at different places. So you can just call the stored procedure and execute that statement instead of writing that statement again and again for different purposes. You can also make the stored procedure with a complex piece of code. So there are different actions happening. You have different SQL statements, one after the other. All that block of code can also be placed within a stored procedure. So let's first see how we can create a stored procedure and what are the different options that are available with stored procedure. So for now, I have a simple statement. It's a simple select query, select star from employees. Now I can run this query again and again, or I can put it within a stored procedure and then just choose to call that stored procedure. So to create a stored procedure, you have to use the create command. So it's as simple as that, create procedure. Then you have to give a procedure name. So you can use a syntax, a naming standard associated with stored procedures. Because they're also system stored procedures, we are going to give a naming standard that will make it obvious that it is a user defined stored procedure. So for that we can use, and what we can use, and this is generally and commonly used, it is USP. And then you can give the stored procedure name, any name. You can give an underscore and a name. You can directly give a name, whatever you choose. So for now, let's just say we are going to set some parameter on employee salary. So I'm just going to call it employee salary. And then what you need to do is just say an as. So here we are just defining the stored procedure. So I have defined it as create procedure. This is my procedure name, and the definition in the stored procedure is simply a select statement. So as simple as that, this is my stored procedure. If I just execute this piece of code, I will simply get a message that the command has been completed successfully, which means that the stored procedure has now been created. You can see that there is no output. So the query select star from employees, that is not been executed. Only the stored procedure has been compiled and validated that the syntax is correct and created in the database. Now, if we want to execute the stored procedure, I have to use the execute exec a keyword and give the stored procedure name. So I'm just going to call employee salary over here. The stored procedure is already created. So if I execute this, you will see that I get the complete output. I can also just call the stored procedure name, and that should also execute the stored procedure. So you can execute the stored procedure even without using the exec keyword. So I can just execute it and I get the same output. Now this is in simple how you create a stored procedure. Obviously, you can pass some input parameters and output parameters to this stored procedure as well. So let's see how that can be done. If you want to pass an input parameter, you have to define that parameter name in the stored procedure definition. So instead of just saying create procedure USP underscore mcell as, when you give the procedure name, after that you define your parameter name. So let's say I want to define some filter on salary. So I define a parameter called at cell. Then you have to define the parameter type. So this is going to be simply an int parameter for me. So I'm just going to define it as int. Now here in my code, what I'm going to say is I am just going to add a condition based on this variable. So now I'm saying where salary is greater than at cell, and this at cell is the input variable value that I will be passing to this stored procedure. Now if I want to, first I have to compile this stored procedure before I can execute it. Now since I had already created this stored procedure USP underscore m cell, I can either create a new stored procedure or I can alter the same stored procedure. So what I can do here is I can say create or alter procedure. So instead of just writing create, what I have done is I've added an or alter. which basically means or tells the database that if the procedure does not exist, then create a new procedure by this name and this definition. If it already exists, then it is going to modify the existing stored procedure with the new definition. So in this case, we are going to modify it. You can use create and alter separately as well. So you can just say create procedure and then you can pass a separate command as alter procedure. But if you want to be sure that the stored procedure does not exist, already exists, if you want to make sure of something like that, then this is a good practice to use create or alter procedure. Now this is going to alter my definition. So I have to first execute this query to make sure that I have the new definition in my stored procedure. So I'm just going to execute this. Again, you will see the message that the command has been completed successfully. Now, when you run this stored procedure, you need to pass this input value. Again, there are two ways you can do this. So let's just ignore this exec for now. And the first option, what you can say is you can mention the variable name. So at cell is the variable name and the value for that variable. So let's say the value for that variable in our case is going to be 30,000. So I can execute it like this. So I'm just going to say this and execute, and I'm going to get some records for which the salary is going to be greater than 30,000. I can, if you see over here, there's 7 rows which were returned. I can also just pass the input parameter value without explicitly mentioning the parameter name. So I can also say 30,000 with the stored procedure name directly, and it should serve the same purpose. So again, I've got the 7 rows. So this can be done as well. You do not need to explicitly define the parameter name in all instances. Now, if I also want an output parameter coming out of this, that can be done as well. And at the same time, you can also pass multiple input parameters. So let's first see multiple input parameters. So I have at cell int, let's also say I want to filter on department ID. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to define another variable at department ID, which is going to be int as well. So now I have two input variables at cell int and at department ID int. Now, since there are multiple parameters that we're defining, we need to separate them with a comma. So here we have separated them with a comma. I can add one more condition here, and department ID is equal to at department ID. So it will take the value from whatever parameter value we are going to pass it. Again, since we are going to alter it, I'm going to run the same statement and you will get that message that the command has been completed successfully, which simply means that the stored procedure has been compiled successfully. Now I need to pass two parameter values. Same thing I can do here. I can either specify the variable name. So I can say department ID equal to 1 and just execute this query. So I get some 4 rows in the output. I can also simply pass the values and it will take it in that order. So I can just say this and not mention the column names or variable names explicitly, and again I'm going to get the same result set. So 4 rows in the output. So I can do it this way as well with multiple input parameters. Now before we move on to the output parameter, let's also say that maybe there is a scenario in which we cannot pass a value to the variables. Then what will happen? If you do not pass a value, let's just skip passing the value of 1 and let's try to execute this stored procedure. What's going to happen is that you're going to get an error message which will say that the value is expected for this parameter department ID because we have only passed the value for the first parameter. So to make sure, and there might be scenarios like that where no value could be passed, you have to specify a default value for your variable. To specify the default value, what you need to do is simply say equal to in your definition, and you can define any default value. I'm just going to define a default value as null. So here if I do not pass a value department ID, it is going to take the department ID value of null. So again, because we need to, every time we change the definition, you need to compile the stored procedure again. So I've compiled it again. I'm just trying to run it again with no value for department ID. So in this case, there won't be an error which is returned, but in this case, there would be no output return, because now the query that is trying to execute is select star from employees where salary is greater than 30,000 and department ID is equal to null. So there are no rows where the department ID is null. That's why no rows are returned. The advantage with this is that there will be no error return in your code. So you can avoid that error return, and maybe this is a valid scenario where no value can be passed. So this can be done. You can do this for the salary column as well. So any input variables you are passing, you can define a null value for all of them. Now, what in case you want to define an output column as well? So you can define an output column as well. When you define an output column, what you need to remember is that only one value can be collected in the output variable. So if your query is returning 3 rows in the output, it will not select the output value from all 3 rows. It will only select one value. The output variable can only contain one value. So make sure that you have a single value coming out, and that can be collected in the output variable. We'll see how it can be done if there are multiple rows and you want to collect that value. So I'm going to define a variable, let's say at count, and this is going to be int as well. And since this is an output variable, you have to put output word as well. Now what we are going to do here is, because we want a single record or single row to be returned in a result set, I'm just going to do a count star over here, and I'm going to collect the value of count star in this output variable at count that we just defined. So I put it right here, and now I'm going to alter the definition once again. So I'm going to execute this. You will see that the command has been completed successfully. When you want to execute this, I'm going to execute this with values, and then you have to define where you want to collect this value. So when you execute, you have to collect this output value which is coming in the at count output variable. So for that, first step is to define a variable. Even in your output, when you're executing the stored procedure, before that you have to define a variable in which you're going to collect the value coming out of the stored variable. So here, let's say we want to define it as at count 1, you will have to define it as end, and this is where we are going to collect this value. So here you will have to define, you will have to say at count 1 is equal to at count and output. And to display that output value, you will have to say a select statement here, and the select statement would be on this variable that you declared here, so at count 1. Okay, so make sure that you understand the difference between this variable which is coming as the output variable from the stored procedure, and this is where you're collecting the value from that output variable. So you have to declare another variable to collect the value from that output variable coming out from the stored procedure. So if you execute all this, so here we have got this error that we must declare the scalar variable at count 1. So there are a few issues with the query that we are trying to run. First of all, here you have to first define the output variable from the stored procedure and then assign it a value. So the variable that you're defining here is going to be the variable defined in the stored procedure, and you're assigning its value to an output parameter which is going to be count 1, which we have declared over here. Secondly, you need to use the exec over here to assign that value to an output parameter. So it will not run simply by calling the stored procedure name in this case when you want to collect a return value from the stored procedure. Now if you execute this, what you're going to get is 4 in your output, which is the count star coming from your query. So there are 4 records, which means there are 4 records. And now let's say what we want to do is, we do not want a count star, we want all those employee names selected somewhere. So in that case, what you can do is you can just do a select star. Over here you'll have all the details, or if you just want to select specific column, in that case you can do without an output variable. So in this case, you do not need an output variable. The result of your select query would automatically be coming in your in the output when you execute the stored procedure. So let's just recompile this procedure, and if you just run this part, this is our part. If you just run this part, you're getting the output. You are getting all the rows in the output. So you cannot store the results if you want multiple rows in an output variable. Now, if you could click on the messages tab, you will see that you are getting something like 4 rows affected, and all that message is coming up every time. Now, if you're doing it in the query window, then obviously these messages can be useful to you. But there's an option called set no count. So on, which is going to turn off this messaging, so it is not going to display how many rows are affected and so on. If you're calling your stored procedure from a command window and not directly from the query window, then this might be useful because there is no real use of all those messages coming in. So you can just add this line, recompile your stored procedure, and you're good to go. All these messages will not be returned to you. Now let's try to create a stored procedure as an example. So what we're going to do is we are going to work with the same employees table, and we are going to find out the maximum hire date from this table. If the maximum hire date is in the same month and year as the current date, then we are going to insert an entry into a table called a hire log table, which is a simple table that I have created. Otherwise, we are not going to insert any entry. So the first step, as we know, is going to be, okay, let's go above here, creating the stored procedure definition. So create or alter procedure USP underscore, let's just call it hire log as. And now we start creating our logic. So we said that we will first want to fetch the maximum hire date from our table. So let's do that first. Let's just say maximum hire date from employees. That's all we want to do. So if I just run this query, I'm just going to get one record in the output. So now I want to check that this maximum hire date lies in the current year and current month. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a variable. So I'm going to say declare at last hired. I'm going to declare it as date, and I'm then going to assign the value of this maximum hire date to this variable that I just declared. So now I have assigned the value to this variable. In the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an if statement. If at last hired. Now you have to check the month and year. So if month of last hired is equal to month of get date, and year of last hired is equal to year of get date, this is my if condition, then. So you do not really need to write it then. If the condition is true, then what you have to do, you have to insert. So insert into, I've created a table called hire log, which just has a hire date column. Values. And what value are we going to insert? The last hired value. So at last hired. Okay, if this is not true, then I'm not going to do anything. Now you will see there are multiple lines of code. There's a select query happening, there's an if then statement happening, there's an insert that is happening. So you have to put this all within a batch of, because there's a batch of SQL statements, you have to put them within a begin and end clause. So begin, all these statements will be executed, and here we are going to end this. So all this block of code has to be executed sequentially as we mentioned here. So we can compile this. It's going to compile this, and you'll get the message that the stored procedure has been compiled successfully. Just to give you a look into the hire log table, so select star from hire log. You will see, so there's just one column in this table called last hired, and there's no data currently in this table. Now we have already compiled a stored procedure. I just need to execute this stored procedure. So what I'm going to say is USP underscore, what is the name I gave? Hire log. And if you execute this, command completed successfully, so the execution happened. I'm going to go and check this table right here. and there should be no records entered because we already saw the last date was in 2020. So now I'm just going to change my procedure a little bit, and since I know the last date was March 2020, I'm just going to put those values as in here, just to make sure, just to give you an idea that this will work if the condition is satisfied. So the last day last month was 3 in our case, and the year was 2020. So I'm just going to execute this once again, and we can remove this bracket. I'm just going to compile the stored procedure once again because I have changed the code, and I'm going to call it once again, and you will see that you have got one row affected as a message. These are the messages that we can avoid if we set the no count on. And if I go here, you will see that there has been an entry made into this table. So all the delete, drop, insert, select statements can be executed within a stored procedure. If you want to drop a stored procedure, then you just need to write a drop command. So if you say drop procedure usp underscore, let's say, let's drop this procedure hi log, it is again going to say command completed successfully. And now if I try to execute this procedure, it should give me an error. So you can see the error message, could not find stored procedure usp underscore log. So this is how and why the stored procedures are useful. They allow you to pass input variables, they allow you to collect output values, they allow you to reutilize the same piece of code, and it is pre-compiled, which makes it faster. Every time you execute that piece of code, it would be faster because it has already been pre-compiled and executed before. So I hope that this video was useful and cleared some concepts to you about writing or creating a stored procedure, executing it. We will take some examples of complex stored procedures where we'll see more into the programming aspect of how to use the looping and all that. So we will do that in future. If you did like the video, then please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please do like, comment, and share this video. We'll be posting many more videos soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Goodbye.